Getting the smile and confidence you've been dreaming about, all from the comfort of your home, isn't a total mystery with Bite clear aligners. Just don't be surprised if all your friends start asking, "What's your secret?" Begin by ordering your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95. Bite clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces, plus they offer flexible financing, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
When you want to have fun and have scratchers to scratch, there's a playful way you can do just that. Scratch with the key or acrylic nail. Scratch with the quill from a porcupine tail. Use a belt buckle from your friend Lamar. Or scratch with your pick while you play guitar. You can scratch in a bunch of different playful ways. Scratchers from the California Lottery. A little play can make your day. Please play responsibly. Must be 18 years or older to purchase, play, or claim.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
New activation and upfront payment for 3-month plan required. Taxes and fees extra. Additional restrictions apply. See mintmobile.com for full terms.
Introducing Carvana Value Tracker, where you can track your car's value over time and learn what's driving it. It might make you excited.
Whoa, didn't know my car was valued this high.
It might make you nervous.
Uh-oh, market's flooded. My car's value just dipped 2.3%.
It might make you optimistic.
Our low mileage is paying off. Our value's up.
And it might make you realistic.
Car prices haven't gone up in a couple weeks. Maybe it's time to sell.
But it will definitely make you an expert on your car's value. Carvana Value Tracker. Visit Carvana.com to start tracking your car's value today.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
In each episode, our special guest brings with them a movie that traumatized them as a child.
This week, our guest is Nathan Ballingrud. He is an author known for his short story collections, North American Lake Monsters and Wounds, 6 Stories from the Border of Hell. His work has been adapted into a feature film and a television series, and his debut novel, The Strange, is out tomorrow. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
We're so excited to chat with you. And speaking of The Strange, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your novel and how you came up with it, or where this idea came from?
Yeah. So The Strange is a story that takes place on Mars in 1930. It's about a 14-year-old girl on a kind of hell-bent on a mission of revenge. And it's being billed as science fiction, but I don't think of it that way. To me, it's more like a dark fantasy sort of thing.
Okay.
It feels to me very much a natural extension of some of the stories that were in Wounds, the same sort of wavelength, although maybe not quite as horrific. Since I was a kid, I remember when I was little, I'd be sitting outside in the twilight, and I would just sit back and stare at the sky. And at the moon, when I could see Mars, that little pink star, it would just be utterly captivating. And I felt this really kind of powerful sense of the romance of it, and of this just kind of magical, distant place, which is also somewhat possible. And I just wanted to kind of tap into that feeling and just kind of recreate it for myself, at least if I possibly could. And, and my daughter, when I first came up with this idea, my daughter was about the age of the character Annabelle in the story. Mm-hmm. And, she's dealing with, a lot of the stuff that, teenagers have to deal with. And being a single dad, I was consumed with the idea of mortality. Like, what's she going to do? Is she going to be able to, fend for herself? And how do I somehow prepare for her for a life, that she can run on her own, like all parents have for their kids. And so all these kind of things were just kind of stirring in the pot, along with the idea of Mars. I think I had read recently I'm blanking on the name all of a sudden. The Worst Hard Time, which is a nonfiction book about the Dust Bowl era. Great big sweeping, dust storms that would envelop everything. And so that kind of that aesthetic, that sort of early 20th century aesthetic was fixed in my mind, and Mars seemed a natural companion to that. And then just the idea of, I've never been a scientifically minded person. There's not a single ounce of plausible science in that whole book, in my book, that is. And so I didn't let that stop me. I was like, this is just going to be fantasy. This is going to be pure imagination. There's nothing plausible in the story. It became its own world. And as soon as I started writing Annabelle, her voice was crisp and clear, like from the get-go immediately, which is a rare gift. And so a lot of it was just sort of like just sitting in the pilot seat, listening to her talk. The co-pilot seat rather, listening to her talk. The only parts that kind of that snagged me sometimes were world building parts, where I had to figure out, how does such and such work? What's the history? All that kind of stuff. But when it came to character, it was just, I felt almost passive in that role.
So I wanted to go back to something you said, because we talked with Haley Piper, author, about a month or so ago. And when we were having her kind of define her book, she said that genre is a marketing term. And so I kind of bring that up because you said people are calling it sci-fi. And when I first read the synopsis of it, I was like, this feels like a throwback to maybe like John Carter or the Princess of Mars kind of idea. And there's like a little bit of Western kind of feel to it, but there's also takes place on the moon, which people are going to think are sci-fi. Then I started reading it and I was like, no, this is definitely from the same author that would create Wounds. Because there's like a sense of without getting into spoilers, there's a sense of like cosmic horror surrounding the idea of Mars. And so I love this book. And I was kind of curious, because you've written a lot of novellas, short stories. Why this for your debut novel?
Oh, that's funny. I stressed about that a lot because of marketing. I think, first of all, I think Haley's exactly right. These are just tags you put on to try to, so hopefully will find you. And so I was worried because of this, although I do feel like it's organic to the previous two books, it's also different, in pretty substantial ways. And so I wrestled a lot with this fear, which that it was going to be different, that it was going to turn off readers from the earlier books. And if I'm trying to build a sort of marketable identity, I thought, then it would be wiser to come up with. I have other ideas which are more in line with some of the books that have come before. Maybe I should focus on one of those. But it just felt like this is the story that wanted to be told. I always kind of, the metaphor I use for this is just dropping a well or dropping a bucket down a well, and whatever kind of water comes up, that's what you have to deal with, and that's what you use. And it's not a perfect metaphor by any means, but this is the story that came up, and it's like, okay, it's here. Once I started writing Annabelle and characters like Sally Milkwood, they just felt really alive. And it felt almost like it would be an act of, dismissiveness or unkindness or irresponsibility to ignore them and to focus on something else because I was worried about what the market was going to think. Ultimately, those kinds of things are not in my control. So,
yeah. Well, so you mentioned that you started kind of writing this when your daughter was around Annabelle's age. How long have you been working on this? Was it something that you've been working on since you've been working on your other short story collections, things like that?
Yeah, on and off for a long time.
Okay.
And the first third of it was written over a period of a long time. It was the first time came several years ago, and then I just put it on the shelf because I was writing things like The Butcher's Table and Wounds, and those kinds of things took precedence. And I felt uncertain about it, because of what I was talking about before. I felt like this is the story that I should be writing, and so I let myself kind of get in my own way for a while and just shelved it for some time. And once the book Wounds was done finally, and it was time for the next thing, that's when I figured this is the next thing. So by that time, Mia had aged a few years. She's now no longer Annabelle's age, but that's okay. By that point, it was its own thing.
Yeah.
Amazing. That's so cool. Well, I do want to ask about some of your short stories, just because I've talked about your short stories on this podcast quite a few times, and like how much I love them, and how you really get this really interesting voice with like a Southern Gothic kind of vibe, but with a very different tonal feel. I know that sounds very weird and convoluted, but I just wanted to hear about like how you came into writing about horror in general, and like why you were attracted to writing like in this. And I know we said genre labels are like marketing, but within like this realm of the horrific, the terrifying, the disgusting, you know?
Yeah. I don't have a clear answer because it's just always been kind of like the landscape of my imagination since I was a little kid. I've always liked the spooky stories. I just respond to them. I like to say that the first really creepy story, the first time I was too young to really consciously be aware of this, but looking back, the first kind of time I really responded to the spooky story was Dr. Seuss. He's got this story in one of his books, one of his little anthologies called "What Were You Afraid Of?" I think that's what the title is, but it's about the pale green pants with nobody inside them. And
yes.
Yes. Oh my God.
They're chasing this little yellow guy, this kind of, the Seussian nighttime, strange architecture kind of place. And it was just so eerie and beautiful and compelling. And that was my favorite story of the time. And ever since then, those are always the stories that I've been drawn to. And it's whenever I write, I just can't help but manifest in the stories too. It's just the way my imagination works.
Hell yeah. And my follow-up thing is, so and tell me if I'm off base here, you have some really interesting interpretations of angels in your books. And as Terry is laughing at me because I love biblically accurate angels. And like, I'm bringing up the Butcher's Table again before we came on about like the creation of, I think the Carrion Angels is the Carrion Angels, and then obviously Invisible Filth. And I just want to hear about like kind of your draw to angels and like making these like perverse kind of disturbing versions of them, which I love, and we don't have enough in literature and in horror media in general. So I just wanted to hear more from you about that because it's my favorite.
Well, I'm so glad to hear it because it's been kind of an obsession of mine for
I'm not alone.
Not at all. And one of the things I like to write about, and this is tied into the answer to the question, although it might not seem like that way immediately, but one of the things I like to write about are morally complicated people. I'm bored by heroes. I'm bored by people who always know what the right thing to do is, or people who always do the right thing in fiction anyway. I just don't find them compelling to read about, and certainly not to write about.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of heaven and hell, pure good versus the opposite is just is also kind of in that context dull.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm drawn to it because I also think that horror is an excellent way to kind of bring us closer to the sense of the numinous, a sense of awe, a sense of spiritual smallness in ourselves, and or feeling small, that is, in the face of something vast. And that's a feeling that really kind of strikes a powerful chord to me, and I really I want to touch that as much as I can in fiction. And so I think that's where it probably started to come from. And then the idea of, the idea of heaven as being something other than what we think started to really appeal to me. The idea of heaven as being a dark place, as the things that come out of there are the representations, the manifestations from heaven as being some, terrifying. And I don't even mean in the biblical sense, although that's clearly where some of this kind of germinated from. The idea that, we fear God not because, because he's terrifying to behold, or his representations are. But it's not even so much that as it is just like, what if we're wrong? What if it's so alien that we just can't comprehend it? And so when we see its manifestations, they're terrifying and monstrous to us. And the idea that hell, and this is something that I really kind of lean into in the Butcher's Table. Hell is like the idea of Lucifer's breath being the substance of love. That's what makes love, because love is something that so often deranges us, steers us down these chaotic and dark paths sometimes. So what if that is what hell is? And there's really nothing more to it than that. It's just kind of flipping it upside down and just playing with it that way.
So you said earlier that you really like morally gray characters, or the good and evil is boring to read. And I was thinking about that, particularly reading The Strange, because it starts off as sort of like the good guys versus the bad guys, with like the thieves that come in that ransack a store. The young girl goes on a quest to go find revenge, and it becomes something a lot more complicated, more nuanced with that. You talked about Sally too, and Sally was one of my favorite characters from the book, because she has her own set of morals and her own set of code, and sometimes they clash with the other characters, but it doesn't necessarily mean that these people are bad or evil.
Right.
And so I thought that was I can see where that kind of germinated from in terms of like what you're discussing right there. I
appreciate that. Sally became one of my favorites too, and if not my favorite.
Although I have to say, the widow storyline was just one of my little favorite, like little nuggets of like just deep cosmic horror. I have to throw that in there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's the one of the things that story was about is Annabelle. She's a kid, and she has a kind of a simple idea, like many of us do, about what's right and what's wrong. And what sets her off on this journey that she undertakes is her understanding of what is right and what is wrong. And a wrong has been committed, and no one wants to do what's right, so she'll do it herself. And one of the things that she learns in this journey is it's just not that simple. And it's never that simple. And all the characters, hopefully, if I did my job correctly, all the characters have their own little moral apparatus, which none of which are in perfect alignment with any of the others. But they all have to find a way to either get along or to deal with in some fashion or other someone who's diametrically opposed. But that's just like what life is, It seems so simple to say it out loud, but we're all, I think, morally complicated characters. I know I certainly am, and this kind of this sort of notion that I think that we're all kind of, or at least society seems to be caught up in right now, in which this kind of stratified idea of what's right and what's wrong, and it's very simple and very uncomplicated is contributing to the problem of us not being able to understand each other.
Yeah. Two things. One is that I'm curious about the adaptations of your work. We've been wanting to have you on for a minute, so I'm so glad this happened, because we actually had Mary Laws, the showrunner for Monsterland, on to talk. And she was fascinating, because we particularly wanted to talk with her because of the queer episode of Monsterland. But what is it like to see kind of your stories come to life in a different medium?
Amazing.
Yeah.
it's awesome. It's fun. When it starts to happen, when it first started to happen a few years ago, it just seemed surreal. It just seemed like this is the kind of thing that would never happen to somebody like me. I was just a waiter at a restaurant, And so it was amazing. And one of the things that I think is particularly fun about it, and I guess there are some writers out there who have an issue with this, but I'm not one of them. I loved watching them change it. Whether it was Mary Laws in the Monsterland show, or whether it was Babak Anvari in the movie Wounds, it was like, it's exciting to see it, to see something that you've made and give it to another artist and see them make it into something that fits the story that they want to tell, kind of in alignment with who they are. It's so exciting. It's like just seeing, I don't know what it's like. But it's fun to watch, and it's invigorating, and it's, I think, creatively stirring.
Yeah.
Harry knows I was a little bit of a nerd with Monsterland. I love Monsterland. I was like, that's based on this story, but not this one. And I was such a dork. I was like such a dork about it. And I loved the show, of course, but I was just like me drawing comparisons to the stories.
I have to listen to that.
Smart.
Mary's amazing. She's so much. She's
really
great
cool.
writer.
She's so cool.
It was fun to get to talk with her. The other question I had, just when I finished reading The Strange, I have to know, do you plan on, because there's a lot of like mystery and there's a lot of world building going on. Do you have plans to have more stories set in this world you've built, or is this a one-off, do you think?
I don't know. I don't have plans.
Okay.
Well, that's not entirely true. It's a complicated answer. It's written to be a self-contained story. It's written not to be the beginning of any kind of thing. And part of the point of this story, too, was that we don't get all of our questions answered.
Nope.
We have to find a way to live with mystery. And because that's life, too. And so I wanted that. That was important to me that be the case. Now, I remember when I sold, when I was trying to sell the book to the editor, I was like, well, I don't think this is a particular spoiler to say. There's a thing called the silence in the book, in which all communication with Earth is stopped, and nobody on Mars knows why or what happened. And I was adamant when I sold it. It's like, that question is never going to be answered. We'll never find out why, because they never.
I love that.
And he was totally on board, so that was great. But to answer your question, so there's definitely room for more stories there. If by some chance people want them, but no immediate plans, except I have started writing these kind of vignettes. They're letters, actually. I don't know what I'm going to do with them yet, but there's a throwaway line in there about two criminals named Garrison and Cone. The sheriff was talking about them, and you just mentioned it offhand one time. And there's this other community called Brawley's Crossing that the book never goes to, but we know is out there. It's kind of like a more of a rough and tumble sort of place. We get the idea. So the idea, I started writing letters from Cone, one of the criminals, to a woman that he loved but never told, who's back on Earth. And so he's writing these letters he can't send her. And she'll never be able to read. And about her, about his life here, about what he wishes might have happened, that kind of stuff. And they're kind of fun to write, but they're not a sustained kind of traditional narrative. They're just they're just letters to someone who will never read them. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with that, but
cool.
But I'm writing them anyway.
I love that. I do want to ask you. You mentioned that you waited tables, but you also used to work as a cook on oil rigs and barges.
I'm glad you brought that up, because that was I honed in on
that experience. And I come from a family of chefs, of like cooks and stuff. So I was especially interested to hear about your experience on oil rigs and barges, especially. Like, I can see where you draw a lot of inspiration from for your stories.
Yeah. It sounds more exciting than it was. I got a job as a line cook in New Orleans. I worked at the place called the House of Blues down there for a few years.
Oh, cool.
So I learned like rudimentary kitchen skills.
Yeah.
If you asked me to come up with a dish, I couldn't, but I can chop onions. I can peel potatoes. I can run a grill and a saute station. And so I got about that level of competent line cook level of cooking.
Right.
Cool.
And so then, I just I left the House of Blues, and I heard about offshore work on the rigs. You go out there for a long time, you make a lot of money, and you come back for a week or two, and it sounded interesting. So I signed up for it. And it was not terribly interesting. It was actually really boring most of the time.
That's probably good, I guess, for the most part. If it's boring on an oil rig, that means nothing is exploding or anyone's getting hurt.
True. We would every once in a while on the rigs, we get into these like pods that would drop off in the case of some kind of calamity, and they would just plummet. This never happened, but we would get in there and would strap ourselves in as if in kind of a drill. And the idea was it would just drop off and land in the water and just kind of float.
God.
Somebody.
What?
That's kind of horrifying to think of.
It's really cramped and smelly in there too. So it was like, yeah, this is not going to be fun if it happens. The most interesting thing that happened was once I was on a barge and a storm was a tropical storm. It formed in the Gulf. And the Gulf, if you've ever lived down there, it's like a ping pong machine when these storms come. Especially in the hurricane season, they're just everywhere and there's kind of roaming around like monsters out there. And so one formed, and so we had to turn around and go back to land. And it was a barge, so it's not exactly speedy. And so
right.
Turned around, we were heading back, and these huge waves, these great big, these Titanic waves are kind of like crashing all over us. The barge was pitching, so much you couldn't put anything on tables; it all slide right off. Everybody was seasick. People were coming into the galley. We were just like munching on saltines to try to keep their gorges down.
Jeez.
And me, I was like in my early 20s, complete moron. It didn't seem that bad, outside. And so at one point I went out. I was
Nathan.
So I opened up the door, I went out on deck and just stood at the deck and was just watching it. And it was just this stupendous sight. It was at night, these big waves crashing, and I could see out in the, few hundred feet away, these birds skimming above the surface of the water. And they looked like they were standing still. They were flying into the wind. And so they were just stationary. And they would dip down every once in a while. It was so extraordinary. And then I went back in and I was like, oh, that was fun. And the head cook at the time said, apparently the captain saw me out there, and they told the cook, he said, if he ever goes out there again, we're gonna lock the doors and pitch him overboard, that stupid son of a bitch. And I was like, oh, I guess that was stupid, wasn't it?
But you talk about like the desire to touch the cosmos in terms of like your loving of horror and stuff. Well, I can imagine just being out on a barge in the middle of like huge waves, that if it kind of reminds you of like how insignificant you are in terms of everything around you.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking of it in those terms at the time.
No, of course not.
And yeah, it was an act of stunning stupidity. And I was just incredibly lucky that nothing happened to me. And the only other time I remember out there, I was on an oil rig. It was nearly shut down. I had a skeleton crew. It was just enough people there to keep it operational. So we had like two cooks, me and one other person. We just have one of us was night and one of us was day. I was the night cook. And everyone was sleeping. There were only like maybe 8 people on this rig. Not many in any case. And so I would get up when I was done. I'd do whatever I had to do to keep something out on the line for people who were up. I go up to the helicopter pad. There were no helicopters. We just came in and off of this one on a boat. And so it would be in the middle of the night, like 2 or 3 in the morning. And I go up on the helicopter pad and just kind of lay down and just look around me. And it was just this big wash of stars overhead, just this enormous, the great big night sky that you can never see here because of city light pollution. And the other thing that struck me at the time was if you go up there in the day, you can't see anything but water from miles and miles and everywhere. And there's nothing but water, just you, this little finger of life out in the Gulf. But at night, you could see like little candles all around the horizon, other rigs, the lights of other rigs.
Whoa.
And it was just a really beautiful, beautiful thing to see.
Wow.
That's
amazing.
Other than
that, it was all very boring.
I was gonna say, when you were starting this story, I was like, this sounds like a horror movie ready to happen. A skeleton crew, 6 people, middle of ocean, on an oil rig. It's like, where does the thing show up? Like, that's the kind of like situation that you just created there. And wow, how amazing.
That's amazing.
So bring it back to childhood, though. You mentioned Dr. Seuss and kind of scary stories being in your head since you found these books, basically. Do you remember like the first your first introduction to horror? Was it movies? Was it books?
That's a good question. I think it was a movie.
Okay.
I think I saw the film version of Salem's Lot, the TV version, before I got Stephen King. But it might have been the other way around. I can't be sure. I remember because my mom was a big Stephen King fan, a big John D. McDonald fan, but But King was the one that caught my eye because she had these old paperbacks. She was reading a book called Night Shift. I know you know Night Shift.
Oh yeah,
short stories, and it was the old 70s paperback edition, which had
the hand. Was it the hand wrapped in gauze with the eyeballs?
Gauze with eyeballs coming out all over the hand. And I would just stare at this thing in fascination.
Same. My dad had a copy of that, and I was always scared me forever. Like still in my head, like freaks me out. Just thinking.
It's one of the all-time great horror book covers, and it's just ingenious. And she was telling me about the story, Quitter's Inc., about this guy who had to, in order to quit smoking because she smoked. So this was something she thought about, and how he had to go around this this little narrow ledge of this big skyscraper. And it just seemed amazing to me. So I remember I picked it up and started reading it. And Mom always let me read whatever I wanted to. And so it was either Night Shift or it was movie Salem's Lot. I can't remember which came first, but both were foundational.
Yeah.
I love them both to this day.
Oh, that Salem's Lot TV show is it reminds me of how good like TV miniseries used to be before we got into like the 90s. And I don't really care for the Stephen King adaptations in the 90s, but that Toby Hooper with Salem's Lot is just, it's perfect.
It really stands up.
It does.
It does. We watched it pretty recently too. And I was like, this actually is quite scary. Mm-hmm. Like I'm still pretty freaked out of these vampires.
I think it was 4 or 5 years ago when I bought the Blu-ray and watched it again. And I was nervous to do it because I didn't want to screw up a very good memory, but I was so happy. It was delighted to see it's actually still really good.
It is. Those eyes, the eyes of the vampires, like that was the thing that has lingered with me since I was a kid. And that rocking chair, just like
that's the one.
Perfect.
My favorite scene. Yeah. Old school glowing eyes. That's still the scariest thing for me. If your eyes are glowing, I'm scared.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Absolutely. And like what other movies were you drawn to as horror movies were you drawn to when you were younger? And it sounds like was your mom also a horror movie person as well as a horror book person? Okay, yeah. Cool. Awesome.
She was, although the ones that I remember more from that time, she watched the Halloween with me, with me and my brother. There's a movie called Night Shift, I think. No, wait a minute.
Was it Graveyard Shift?
No, it was one with William Shatner in a hospital. Visiting Hours. I think.
Yes. Okay, I was like, I know what you're talking about. I just can't remember the name.
Yeah, and stuff like that. And then, but the things that I remember most from being a kid were 80s movies, because that's when I started really having access to the VCR when I was left by myself. And I would go to the video stores and peruse those garish shelves. A wonderful experience that I feel sorry for, people who were born too late to have that experience.
There's nothing like trolling the aisles at Blockbuster, your home video store, Hollywood Video, whatever you had access to, and just seeing the movies laid out in front of you.
When you can't watch, there's no internet to watch the trailers for. So you go by these eye-popping covers, these garishly colored covers, and take your chances. But I remember things like Return of the Living Dead, Reanimator,
classic covers.
Those are the movies that really kind of like stuck with me from that time. The Thing, of course, Children of the Corn really stuck me at the time, although that does not stand up, it turns out. I discovered, but
neither does the new one.
No, it doesn't. I'm not surprised.
Right, but I know, but
because the story is great. The story is one of
the short story is also in Night Shift, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
Yeah, that is one of what an incredible short story collection.
It is,
Boogeyman made me throw that book across the room,
which is turning into a movie this year.
Yeah. Oh, it is turning into a movie this year. We'll see. But okay, we're going to take a quick commercial break and then we'll come right back to talk about the movie that you brought to you today. And we're back. Oh my gosh, hold on. I got distracted by your cat. What is the cat's name?
That is Macy. She's very cranky.
Oh my God, baby Zucchini.
But if I put her wrong, she'll make me pay.
What a baby. So I have a cat walking behind me. So I saw a cat.
Oh, Yanni.
Alice and Macy do not get along.
But they're on the same couch together.
They can do that.
Opposite ends.
That's good. Hey.
Yeah, opposite ends for sure.
That's good for cats, I will say. Anyway, sorry. We love cats here, so I was very excited to see a cat friend.
When you want to have fun and have scratchers to scratch, there's a playful way you can do just that. Scratch with the key or acrylic nail. Scratch with the quill from a porcupine tail. Use a belt buckle from your friend Lamar. Or scratch with your pick while you play guitar. You can scratch in a bunch of different playful ways. Scratchers from the California Lottery. A little play can make your day. Please play responsibly. Must be 18 years or older to purchase, play, or claim.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
New activation and upfront payment for 3-month plan required. Taxes and fees extra. Additional restrictions apply. See mintmobile.com for full terms.
And we're back from commercial break. Wow. So Nathan, what movie did you bring with you today for us to discuss?
I came with Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Okay, so let me read a super brief synopsis of the film, and then we'll jump right in. So in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Roy Neary, an Indiana electric lineman, finds his quiet and ordinary daily life turned upside down after a close encounter with a UFO, spurring him to an obsessed cross-country quest for answers as a momentous event approaches.
That's actually not a bad synopsis from IMDb. We've gotten some wild ones recently, but that one's actually pretty good. Okay, so take us back. How old were you when you saw this? How did you see this? Why is this your Scarred for Life pick? Why did this scare you? Give us your horror story.
I've tried to remember the first time I saw it, and I can't be sure. I'm 52 years old now, so it was a long time ago. I watched it again last night for the first time in a long time. I think that I saw it on a VCR tape.
Okay.
But I haven't remembered seeing it earlier. So it's possible that I was brought to the theater. I can't remember for sure. Yeah. I can remember, though, what freaked me out about it, and which is now the scene that we've seen a million times in the X-Files and all these other places. But it's a scene where the little boy is in the house and his toys are starting to wake up, and the lights are coming in through the shutters, and the whole house is rattling and shaking. And what struck me about it, even watching it last night, was the kind of the way that Spielberg really expertly captured the realism of the 70s household. The way everyone's talking over each other, the way the kids are just kind of like half teasing, half fighting each other, the way my brother and I often used to do. The sort of teasing that's all in fun, but it's going to lapse over into tears in a second. It was so realistic, and it felt so real, even last night, that I know it must have felt that way to me too, as a kid. And to see that kind of place fall under siege, the way it is with this thing that you can't understand. You don't ever really get you don't know what it is. You see at one point the lights, and they look beautiful, and the little girl says it looks like ice cream, but even then, you don't know what's inside those things.
Yeah.
And that's what got me. That's what I remembered scaring me as a kid. The siege of lights and the shaking of your home, the safe place. Suddenly isn't safe anymore. Your toys are ambulating around without you. It's like that's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Because that's like kind of earlier in the movie. Did the actual abduction scene bother you as a kid with with Barry getting?
Yeah, when the kid's in the cat door and the mom's trying to grab his feet, and he's just yeah. That was
that's freaked me out now, and I've seen this movie before. I was watching it and I was like,
That was intense.
How actually scary this abduction scene is. Like, it actually is quite horrific.
And as a little kid, I wasn't too many. I guess I was a few years older than that kid was, but still, it was like, something bad's happened to the kid. That seemed transgressive to me somehow. Yeah. Although watching it again last night, I was like, the kid at no point is ever bothered by any of this. The kids,
no,
my friends
are quite excited. He's like, hell yeah, we're gonna go on a trip.
Somehow that didn't soothe me as a little boy.
I can imagine.
Fair though, because you're like, is he actually gonna have fun up there? Or, well, was this like your first time seeing any kind of like alien movie? And like, did it give you like inspire any kind of fear in aliens?
It must have been my first time. It had to have been my first time, unless maybe I saw some Doctor Who with some aliens. It's possible, but nothing like this. Nothing on that scale. And it didn't ever make me really afraid of aliens, especially because the story turned out all right. But so that must have mollified me a bit. But it definitely made me fascinated. It definitely, it was one of those early kind of like signal moments where your imagination is getting shaped, like clay. And here's this movie, this extraordinary, scary, exciting, visually overwhelming movie about aliens, and the fact that at the end it turned into something else that was exciting, that it was beautiful, that it was there's this notion, and of course this is all over my head as a kid, but I think on some subconscious level I was understanding that it was the wonder. There was wonder in it, and that made an impact. I don't think that sense of wonder's ever gone away. Even with the X-Files, that's like they're more threatening in there, but the wonder is still there.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because when you were talking earlier and you're talking about, again, going back to that idea of like touching the cosmic or like seeing the cosmic, that I immediately wrote down a note because I wanted to bring that up again, because that's kind of how I felt watching this movie, is this idea of like experiencing something that is completely alien to you, but like it brings in that awe, it brings in horror, it brings in joy, it brings in a whole bunch of emotions throughout this 2-hour movie until the ultimate, like, final area where it's like, oh, this is all good, this is happy, this is a joyful thing. Yes, we're seeing something that is completely beyond our understanding of science and everything, but it's joyful and it's wonderful. And I was thinking about that as you were talking earlier, because this is my first watch. I've never seen this movie before.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that this was your first time ever seeing this. What did you think? I have to know.
Well, I wondered when I sat down, I was like, okay, have I really not seen this movie? Or have I like seen it on a VHS as I was a kid and like maybe parts will come back to me? No, I had no recollection of ever seeing this movie before. I remember seeing the cover in the, at Blockbuster or at the video store, but I never saw it. I must have known somewhat about it because I knew that the aliens weren't bad. And I think that might have been why as a kid I stayed away from it, because I thought it might just be like a little kidsy kind of movie. I don't really know what my thinking was, but I think because I knew that the aliens weren't evil and that it had something to do with music, that it probably wasn't going to be a scary thing that like little Terry wanted to go rush towards, because I was always rushing towards the next thing that was going to scare me. So I never watched it, but last night I was like, when did he make this? I had to go back because it's like right after Jaws. This is his next movie. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, man.
He makes Jaws and then this? Like, what is that? That's not fair. Like,
it's
save some talent for the rest of us, ass. I'm just kidding.
And then Indiana Jones came really quick after this.
Yes.
I don't know the next one, but it might have been.
Like, I haven't seen The Fabelmans yet, and I need to, because I know that's like Spielberg's. But I haven't watched Spielberg in a while. But just like, he knows how to make a movie, and he knows how to make an epic like movie that gets into your bones. Like, I don't think I've appreciated that as much until like watching Close Encounters and being like, fuck, like this guy knows how to get you invested in his characters. He knows how to make a scary sequence, but also knows how to make like, I mean, he said this with Jaws too, and even E.T. Like, he knows how to craft these horror sequences. So his movie feel like they're not necessarily horror, but you have these horror moments like that feel so terrifying and up the stakes. But at the same time, he delivers these stories that are also like so like deeply emotional and about family and purpose and everything. And it's just so incredible to watch what he was able to make in the 70s. And these horror / sci-fi narratives are just incredible. And like I was like getting emotional watching the music scene again when they're speaking to each other with music. And I'm like, oh, we're just communicating with music and it's so beautiful. And like it's just like John Williams' score comes in and it starts using those notes. And I'm just like, God, like I want to see it in the theater. I've never seen it on a big screen. And I really want to now, especially after like seeing this moment. So I'd seen this a long time ago when I was like 16 with my dad, but it was a really bad, I was watching it. I was at my dad's house and him and his wife were fighting the whole time. So like I was not paying attention to the movie. It's like very weird. It was like a whole thing, but I'm so glad I could watch it this time. And just like, I liked it when I first saw it, but I was 16 and it was a weird situation, but like watching it now, it's like, this is like the basis for all Alien movies going forward, you know, like, you mentioned the X-Files, Nathan. Like every X-Files episode feels like this. I mean, think about all the other Alien movies that are out there. And I thought a lot about Arrival. The Denis Villeneuve movie from 2016, 2017. And it's just like, this is where so many Alien movies came from. And I didn't appreciate that until this time around. And not just in terms of like the shaking houses and the abduction, but just like in our own, like you said again, Nathan, like relationship to the cosmos and the sense of wonder we all have. Because I think what's really interesting here is like all of the characters, when they see the aliens, have like seem like children, like they're excited and they're curious. And I think that curiosity is something that I didn't notice before in this movie, and like what really keeps this movie like pushing forward. Even when that curiosity becomes obsession, then it's like very harmful. I think that air of curiosity is really fascinating in this movie.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's refreshing to see a movie in which the military is part of the response, but it is not, 75 trained guns, on the ramp. It's the scientists are taking the lead, and yes, it's curiosity, not fear, which is driving them. That was exciting.
Yeah, I was thinking about the decade of the 70s and a lot of like horror and sci-fi that was coming out at the time, and kind of the movies that were coming out during the 70s, because there's a lot of like paranoia, a lot of angst, a lot of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre drawing on Vietnam War. Like there's a lot of that kind of fear that was going on in this decade, and I think it kind of, you saw it in a lot of the movies that were coming out: Logan's Run, Soylent Green, Clockwork Orange, Alien at the very end of the decade. Like all of these, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Exorcist, like all of these things are like dealing with existential dread, but also like fear of where you're living or fear of the future. And so I'm watching this movie and I'm watching this unfold with all this wonderment that, as you were saying, Mary Beth, that the characters all seem to exude. And I love the one little, there's a couple little moments, like the guy that is, when they've all perched up on the hill, and there's the guy with like a sign saying, "I hope you came in peace," or something to that regard. And he's
stop and come in peace, or stop and come in peace. Stop and be peaceful, or something like that. Yeah.
And I see that, and I see the way this movie is all about kind of communication, and it's sort of like a refreshing change of pace to a lot of the movies that came out of that decade. And it surprised me that like this is one of the few science fiction movies from that time that isn't about, either lasers in space or warfare or good and evil. It is about the world coming together to see what is coming from the outer space. And it just, I don't know, there's something very refreshing about that as I was watching this last night, and felt kind of counter-programming to a lot of what was coming out in the 70s.
Well, it feels hopeful in a way too, because I think that, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on with Roy's character, like his obsession and that destruction of his family. but there's also like this hopefulness at the end when he gets like he finally finds his purpose. It's like an interesting look at like finding your purpose and finding your greater calling, which is interesting, and like how he found that and he was able to find hope for not just for himself, like for himself, but then also, you know, there's like a greater hope from like the scientific community there, and kind of just like we aren't alone. And I think so often, like I was terrified of aliens as a child. Like one of my number one fears, I was terrified of being abducted. Like I was obsessed with aliens because I saw so many things like you're talking about, Terry, that are like aliens are evil. They're going to cut like fire in the sky. They're going to come and abduct you and experiment on you and all this crap. And so seeing this kind of hopeful, like they do cut, like to be cliche, they come in peace and like they just want to communicate was so refreshing. Because boy, oh boy, aliens are terrifying to me, or were terrifying to me as a child. I've read too much about them. I did too much research about them. And I knew about like the different kinds of encounters before I saw this movie. There's like all the different like levels of encounters and all that stuff. And so watching this, I was like, oh, this is much more hopeful than like the scary stuff I read about people like waking up on steel tables and getting probes. It's just like, yes. But I am curious before, do you believe in aliens, Nathan? Is that a thing that you kind of think about? Like maybe not aliens, life outside of our own planet, I suppose is probably a better way to put it.
Do I believe there's life outside of our own planet? Absolutely. I think, to me, the notion, if you just think about how vast the universe is, and how every time we have an improved telescope with better lenses, we realize it's so much bigger than we even thought. To think that there's no other life out there just seems absurd. You know, it seems like the height of narcissism.
Right.
What does it look like? Does it fly ships? Who knows? You know, I don't have any idea about that. I think it's pretty doubtful that we're being visited by aliens. But you know, the one constant I've noticed about myself as I get older is that I too am much more comfortable with living with mystery. A lot of the things I used to be very confident of in my youth, I am no longer confident of at all. It's the old cliche: the older I get, the less I know, and it's actually true. And I like that that's true. That's exciting. I like mystery. And so, do I think there's life out there? Definitely I do. Do I think it's visiting us? I doubt it, but who knows?
Right.
Fair.
When you were a kid, because like I mean, I'm thinking about the 70s. I grew up in the 80s, and so like I'm thinking about that time when there was like an obsession with aliens and obsession with, you know, are they here? Are they probing people? Are they mutilating cows? Are they making designs in fields? Like all of that kind of stuff. Did that ever fascinate you as a kid, or did you not have any recollection of that kind of stuff?
I remember all that stuff. I remember all being part of the zeitgeist. But I was never particularly fascinated by it. I was interested in it in the sense that I was interested in everything that was, you know, came under the umbrella of fantasy, science fiction, horror, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was weird and interesting, but it was never a thing that really, it was never at the forefront. It was always like a side thing that I was curious about. By that time, by the 80s, I was a horror kid, and that's where all my attention was going. You know, Stephen King, Clive Barker, Anne Rice, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so it never gripped me, but you know, I'd watch the movies when they came on.
So I do want to talk about the, like, when we first, I guess Roy first sees the spaceship, like his first encounter, because like we have this buildup of like, there's like, we know something is going on. The military finds these planes that have been returned that are from World War I or II. I'm so sorry. I totally forgot. Old like planes. And they can't find the people. I mean, so we immediately, I love like the setting of the scale of this, by the way. Like Spielberg is so good at this, and setting up scale and being like, oh, this is not just about one guy. Like this is a huge film. And but then, you know, we hyper focus on Roy, who, and I love that Spielberg is so often about blue collar, like, people. These are people that are just trying to live. Like, they are working jobs to get by. They have suburb, like, standard houses, and they're just trying to live a life. And we see him, and I love how they set it up where the car comes behind him, and it's like, oh, there's a car pulling up behind his truck as he's going to find, like, why the power is out. And it's someone yelling at him, whatever. And then, I'm like, oh, I know what's happening next. And then we see the lights pull up behind him again. Yeah. And it's so quiet. And then it goes up. Ugh. And it's just, I mean, like, it's so simple, but it's so genius. And you're just so easily like, oh. And then everything starts. We have, like, the moment where he sees the lights and everything is shaking and everything is just, like, absolutely, like, what the fuck is going on? But it's so well blocked and, like, shot and edited where you feel like you are in that truck, like you are with him and you are seeing something strange, and instead of being scared, you are energized. It's like I talked about his purpose, like, all of a sudden he's like, I found a purpose, like, something here is speaking to my heart. I have finally found a reason to, like, exist. I know he doesn't ever say that, but it feels like that, you know what I mean? Like, he's kind of breaking out of the blue collar job, the family, and he is following a higher calling in like a weirdly religious way. That I'm where I think about it, like, an interesting, like, religious parallels here of, like, higher callings and going to this, like, giant structure in the middle of nowhere to, like, answer a calling from a higher being. It's so weird and cool. But I just love that scene, and where we get, like, and he isn't even abducted, but he just, the idea of it is so, it latches onto him. And I think, like, that is just so effective, that part.
I agree. We talk about kind of transgression. I think the fact that we have the main character by the end of the movie leaving his family to go to outer space is quietly transgressive for, like, the 70s. And even Spielberg, I did find an interview with him where he said that, you know, if he had written this now as an adult with a family, he would never have had the main character leave his family. But I think it's interesting that that is the choice that he makes by the end of this film.
I agree. And it struck me watching it last night how funny it was that the question of his children or his wife never comes up.
No.
Not what. They leave and he forgets about them, which I'm just like, okay, I guess that's fine. Like, he's just like, come back, Ronnie. And then he's like, all right, cool, I'm going to Wyoming. And then just, like, never again is his family mentioned. And
my daughter was watching with me last night, and she was like, you know, they didn't even talk to those guys that got off the ship to ask them how it was. No, you know, this guy went up there and moved away. It's like, all my organs are alien organs now. They don't work the same, but you never know. You know,
when they got off, they were walking and talking. They were probably fine.
What could go wrong? It is hilarious, and yeah, that definitely struck me too. It doesn't surprise me to hear, though, that Spielberg says that once he had a family, he realized that doesn't necessarily ring very true.
But I also feel like it's a little bit transgressive in how it has the crazy man. We are so used to, in horror and in so many movies, the crazy lady, and everyone's doubting her, and she's the one that's seeing something. And we see that a little bit with, oh my God, what the hell is her? Jillian's character. And I want a movie from her perspective, more from her perspective. That's just me. But, like, we see a little bit of that, like, crazy woman kind of like, oh God, like, what happened to her kid? But he's really, like, the crazy husband, and his wife is the one who's like, you're being insane. And, like, we never see that. And the man is always very reasonable. He is always the one that is, like, he's holding the family together. And so, again, having a dad and a husband, like, especially in this 70s where it's like, the man of the house, he is going to protect you all and take care of you, and it's all great. And then he falls apart. He starts building visions out of mashed potatoes. And pillows and dirt in his train set. And it's just, I think, a really interesting inversion of how we, like, see gender dynamics in this, especially in this decade of like genre cinema. I think is super fascinating. I do think Steven Spielberg could do better with writing women, but that's okay. I will give him a pass.
I agree. I agree with all of that. And it was interesting to me too, tangential to this, Jillian's character, her kid gets kidnapped, and she doesn't really talk about him again that much. She does a little bit when they get there, But it's not like I didn't get the impression that this was a person whose child had just been, ripped out of her hands and taken into space. It's like, well, it's not my time. I can't go. I can't go down there with you. My kid's not here. I was like, you seem pretty chill about the whole thing,
especially with how traumatic what it was.
Well, it's like this horrible, like these clouds are rolling in, and these, like it's just like this terrifying. The whole setup, and I can see exactly where Jordan Peele was pulling from Nope.
Yep.
Did you see Nope, Nathan?
Yes. Yeah.
So, terrific. and I love this though, because it's like a lot of people were drawing this comparison when it first came out, and then rewatching, it's like he totally like was creating his homage to like the Steven Spielberg-esque alien blockbuster, and the abduction scene I think is really indicative of that. Yeah. Just with like the way it's approaching the house, being like the fucking light through the red light through the keyhole. Never has that, like, such a small bit of light felt so menacing than when we just see that light coming through the keyhole and the little boy opening the door. It's just so much of like the showing, not telling, or telling, not show. Yes, I'm not quite sure what giving us a little, not showing like a full alien or like the full ship, but you're getting like what mystery. Is happening, and you don't the mystery of it. And I think it's so fucking scary, but I love seeing like what Jordan Peele was doing with Nope, and like how he gave. I think a lot of people did, but some don't appreciate. Like we haven't had a movie like this in such a long time, and I think Peele creates something so special with Nope. This is now a Nope episode of the podcast. We don't get enough alien movies like this, and I think it's just like I wish we had more of these giant alien movies, because aliens are fucking cool.
Yeah, and that leans into the awe. We get murderous monsters, which are fun. I'm here for it. But we don't get much of the sense of awe and wonder that Spielberg and Peele tapped into in theirs.
Yeah,
it's funny. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's where going back to a little bit to what we were saying before about the characters. I think if this film stumbles a bit, it's at the end where Spielberg puts all the narrative focus on the awe aspect and forgets the humanity of these characters and their what they're giving up or what they thought they lost. The reunion between Jillian and the little boy was almost like an afterthought. It's like, oh, here's your kid.
Yeah.
Should have been, that's a profound moment. And
right.
And she doesn't want to go down the hill. I think if I were writing this, I was like, you're not going to keep her from going down that hill because that might be where her child is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's definitely a critique, because like I was, when I was watching this, I was like, because I again never seen it, didn't know what was going to happen, sitting here and I'm like, okay, this whole movie has been focused on these characters and as you said, Nathan, humanity, and by the end we get like spectacle, and it is spectacle, like it is gorgeous, the practical effects, the ship, everything is just, it's beautiful and it's awe-inspiring. But I will say that when it's almost as like we're kind of like rattling off on a list. Okay, well, everyone that was abducted is now back. Kid is now here. We're not going to question any of this, because I wanted to know, it was like, what was it like being on the ship? How did you survive? How are you the same age? Like all these questions, like what is going on in that ship that I had? And we focused, it's almost like it's just rattling off these things, and then all of a sudden Roy is getting on the ship with them, and it loses a little bit for me in terms of that human aspect there with the ending, for sure.
Yeah,
personally,
well, especially as like we reveal this alien that is a very scary, very stringy, like long alien that I'm like,
creepy.
I come in peace? Absolutely not. Like you look like a scary spaghetti noodle. But like, I mean, they do that reveal is terrifying, where it's just like, what is that? And then it's just a bunch of little gray. Then we get like the typical like little gray aliens that come out of it that look like kids. Yeah. But again, like it is so focused on the spectacle, and I think that's something interesting that in Nope they play with, about like the obsession with the spectacle and what happens when you're obsessed with that spectacle. And again, like in 1977, I suppose it makes sense. Everyone's like, because I think Star Wars had just come out around this time too. So everyone's like, look what we can do in space, or like what we can do. And it's like I can understand why he was just like, let me just show y'all what I can do, which is great. But you're saying it loses that emotional core to it in terms of like, the mashed potato scene when he's building the mashed potato like, God, that moment. And I was thinking about like Jaws a little bit, like a dinner two dinner table moments.
What a comparison piece for the family dynamics in Jaws and that dinner sequence.
Like he's looking around and all of a sudden everyone's silent. The kids are crying, and I was like, and he's like, well, I guess you noticed that something. Daddy's been acting a little bit strange, and I was like,
yeah.
Like that moment, there's like a split diopter shot of Richard Dreyfuss like kind of laughing nervously, and his son just like trying to keep it together, but noticing like my dad is not okay. And it's such an incredible moment. And I think that's something I really appreciate about Spielberg is he is so good at spectacle, but he is also really good at these quiet character pieces that like you are more invested in these dynamics. Which again is why I'm like, wait, we just left the kids. Like there was some really interesting stuff going on here with the kids, and then they kind of just disappeared. But that scene is just so tragic, and it's wow.
It's a really powerful scene. Yeah, so Spielberg clearly has the chops for it. I would have preferred a beat, at the end about acknowledging what he's leaving. But it's. It's like your second movie. Like you're gonna make some mistakes, I guess.
I think.
Third, pardon me.
Duel, I think that was his first.
Oh, that's right. I forget about Duel sometimes.
Duel, yeah. It's nitpicking. It's an extraordinary.
It is,
and it's like it's so easy for people to come along and just chip away at this minor little imperfection here and there and say, well, I would have done this. But
like really, I couldn't have made that. Like I just know that I could never have made anything like this before. So like, who am I to be like, hey, Spielberg? What are you doing, buddy? Like, who the hell am I?
But what I did find fascinating is that if you were to like distill the story down, it is narratively very simple. It is experience UFOs, get obsessed, go to this place, see UFOs. Like that is the basic like plot structure. And yet, even though it's 2 hours, like I didn't realize there was multiple cuts. I watched the director's cut, which I guess takes like the original, and there was like a special edition that also included like a shot inside the ship that the producers asked him to do. And so then that was like for a while the only cut that was out there. And then he did a director's cut that brought it more in line with the original, but also had some of the embellishments in it. So, and it's the longest cut. So it was 2 hours and 18 minutes long. The one
that's the one I watched. Okay. I was like, I don't know what I watched.
I guess there's one that's shorter that I think is like 2 hours and 10 minutes or somewhere in like.
That's one I watched.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'm going into this and I'm like, for a movie that is 2 hours and 18 minutes, almost 2.5 hours long, the actual narrative plot is very simple, but it's because he does focus so much on the characters and building each of these interactions and all these separate things that are happening before bringing them together. And I do think that is probably why, I mean, yes, we're nitpicking, but like, I feel that the ending kind of loses a little bit of that luster is because we did spend so much time building out the relationships and the characters and the interpersonal dramas that by the end of the movie, I feel kind of get maybe tossed to the wayside for a giant spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still, I mean, it's just it's a remarkable movie. I was watching it. I was like, okay, I'm seeing where M. Night Shyamalan got like signs from. The house invasion feels very Signs like the way the camera was moving. I'm like, okay, I'm seeing where he's pulling from that. I absolutely was thinking of Nope and Arrival as well, Mary Beth, when they're interacting with them and the idea of the spectacle and the way clouds move and the way that the UFOs were using clouds that looked like a giant storm was coming in. Just so many things that you can see that this defined the science fiction movie like this of aliens and Earth for decades.
I was watching this, like I said, with my daughter last night, and it was her first time seeing it. And it's one of the fun things about watching these old movies again with your kid, who's now experiencing some of these things for the first time. She liked it too, and she was saying exactly what you both are saying. That she says, I'd never realized how much of what I've seen are homages to this movie.
Mm-hmm.
There was a scene that she even remembered seeing a scene from Scooby-Doo when she was little. She said, "Oh, that was an homage to the Devil's Rock." And I guess there's this elevated shot of the base right at the bottom of the rock, and she recognized it from the cartoon. And she mentioned Nope and all this stuff. It's like, yeah, this is influent. This has been profoundly influential.
Yeah. You said your daughter liked it?
Yes, she did.
Yeah. Oh.
But before we wrap up, I just want to give a shout out to the John Williams score. As always, that man always knows how to score a movie, obviously. But I was just focusing a lot on like how the score plays so much with being scared than curious. Like there's a point when they go back. It's after the first night they see the UFOs and everyone is going back to that spot and they think that these lights are coming and there's like this kind of fear, like the score is kind of scary, like, oh my God, what is that? But then as the lights get quicker, the lights approach, it gets lighter and like, oh wow, it's actually happening. And everyone feels kind of excited. And then it's obviously helicopters, but there's something really, it's just so beautiful with how he constructs a score to really take you on that emotional journey of fear to curiosity to like delight. And I think that is super on display at the end. Obviously we have like the symphony of extraterrestrials like playing music together. And I know it's like this diegetic symphony, which I think is really interesting. But then Williams' score comes in and is playing with those tones, the do, 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 do. Nope, got it all wrong already. Anyway, but we know the tones. But it's just, he always is just creating these bombastic but beautiful scores that fit the emotional state of every scene so well. Like, I don't understand how out the gate, this pairing of Spielberg and Williams is just so iconic throughout all of like American cinema from the 70s onward. And it's just incredible. Like
it is. And one of the things I noticed last night for the first time is that in the end where he's entering the ship, Williams kind of interweaves into his score the main theme from When You Wish Upon a Star.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my God.
Yeah, because
beautiful touch.
It is a beautiful touch because when I was looking up information about this, Spielberg apparently really just wanted to end with that song because like it was like a through line in terms of the Pinocchio in the beginning and this idea of like wishing upon a star, of seeing the future, of seeing like the stars in the sky and having that kind of hope and having that idea of, I guess in a way transcending to the next phase, because that's kind of what Pinocchio did. But it's like a little kernel that is introduced in the beginning, and he wanted the movie to end with that song. And I guess I don't know why it didn't happen, but I do love that John Williams incorporated that in with his score. It's classic.
Yeah, it was a nice touch.
The one last thing I wanted to kind of mention that I really fell in love with, and it's so small, but it's this idea. I mean, I think we talked a little bit about it earlier, communication and language, because here we have, I love this cartographer that is also a French translator. And so there's this guy that speaks French, played by Francois Truffaut, who was a famous director in France, and Spielberg loved him and kind of wanted him to be in this movie. But like we have him, and he talks, and then the English translator is talking. There's a point where they're in India, and then he's saying it in French, it's getting translated in English, and then English being translated to Hindi. And I'm just like, this idea of using the entire world is kind of the implication here to suss out what is going on here. And then by the end of the movie, being able to communicate through music as like a different translational idea of language is so, I don't know, it's so fascinating to me and so just like hopeful.
So fucking smart too.
Yeah.
I'm just it's so cool.
It is.
Oh, on that note,
Yes.
Shall we wrap up and give this a rating out of 5?
Sounds good.
All right, Terry, you're up first. How many mashed potato towers out of 5, or mountains made out of mashed potatoes, do you give Close Encounters of the Third Kind?
I mean, I have to give it 5. This movie is, even though there's little nitpicks in terms of, maybe we wish this would have happened, or it feels like this is left out. The fact that Spielberg is coming off of Jaws and just manages to knock this completely out of the park and cement him as a blockbuster director is it's stunning to see the way other movies have pulled from this film. Like back when when everyone's like, oh yeah, it's the kind of his Spielberg film, his Close Encounters. I had never seen it. And so I'm like, yeah, okay, sure. It's aliens and it has like scope of Spielberg. Sure. But then you watch this and it's like, no, I can see exactly the kind of homages that are coming from it. Just the way this movie has defined the Alien movie kind of for decades. It's just, it makes me angry how perfect it is. So 5. What about you, Mary Beth?
I'm also 5. I mean, like, I loved it when I first saw it, but even now even more, I can, again, I could say I have, problems with parts of the script, but like, it doesn't really at all, they pale in comparison to like the feelings you get watching this movie, these feelings of awe, these feelings of like, and again, even now, this movie holds up incredibly well. Everything is so beautiful to look at, and it's because there is that human aspect that we have. And I think watching this again has just given me such a deeper appreciation for Spielberg. I think a lot of us are just like, Spielberg makes all these big movies, but it's like, no, he makes like a movie. He isn't just making blockbusters. Like, he is making these like gorgeous pieces of cinema that I don't think I appreciate enough. And I'm glad I got to watch this and like really think about like, you know what? Spielberg really is such an incredible director and he deserves all of that credit. And this movie is just gorgeous and scary and hopeful. And I'm just so glad I got to revisit it. And so, Nathan, you have the final word. How many mashed potato mountains out of 5 do you give Close Encounters of the Third Kind?
I'm going to give it 4.5.
All right.
Because everything you said was true. It's like it's Spielberg really kind of coming into his own. I mean, well, he did Jaws. I guess he already had done. It's like but I have to, forgetting the character at the character beats at the end. It just, character's paramount for me, and so I'm going to have to take a few scoops off the potato mountain for that. But
that's fair.
But an amazing movie and a lot of fun to watch again.
Hell yeah. Well, thank you so much, Nathan, for joining us to talk about Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Where can our listeners find you? And the floor is yours to plug away. And do you have anything coming up that you can talk about?
Well, they can find me. I'm most active on Twitter. And when I say most, I don't mean I'm terribly active, but more there than anywhere else. N Ballingrud. Instagram somewhat. Yeah, well, and the book is coming out. The book is coming out on the 21st, in my first novel. And I got a novella coming out next year called Crypt of the Moon Spider.
Ooh.
But I really can't say anything more about that yet because I haven't been given clearance to talk about it. But it's coming.
Sweet.
So that's what's coming from me.
Amazing. So listeners, you've heard from us. We want to hear from you. What was your experience with Close Encounters of Third Kind? You can send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us directly on Twitter. I am at MB McAndrews.
And I'm McGailey Dreadful.
And of course, don't forget to follow the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe. And if you want to help support us, we do have a Patreon. We're releasing monthly content.
Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please stay safe out there. Most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
Somebody please think of the Somebody please think of the children.
When you want to have fun and have scratchers to scratch, there's a playful way you can do just that. Scratch with the key or acrylic nail. Scratch with the quill from a porcupine tail. Use a belt buckle from your friend Lamar. Or scratch with your pick while you play guitar. You can scratch in a bunch of different playful ways. Scratchers from the California Lottery. A little play can make your day.
Please play responsibly. Must be 18 years or older to purchase, play, or claim.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system.
If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served.
Hi, I'm Detective Dave.
I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood.
So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished.
From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.